What's up everybody, welcome back. In today's video we're going to set up the scoring for our kills and deaths, and we're also going to set up a scoreboard, and the scoreboard will sort, so the player with the highest score is actually on top. So right now you can see I have 1 kill, and if I will take the client down 2 times then I should be on top of the scoreboard. So let me see, where did he go? Over here. So right now I have 3 kills and I'm on top of the scoreboard. So that's what we're going to do today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to get your hands on the project file, you can become a member of the YouTube channel, and then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord, and that will also give you access to the premium downloads of this project. So with that stuff out of the way, let's dive into today's video. First of all, there's one small thing I want to take a look at. So right now, if we are hosting a lobby and we are cycling through our game modes, for every time that we pass by the free-for-all game mode, we're adding options to our combo boxes. So we need to make sure that we fix that, and that's really not too hard. So let's go to our widgets folder and open our lobby menu. And in the graph we have a function called update game mode options. So let's go to that function, and then all the way at the beginning of the function we want to make sure that we clear our combo boxes, and those are the ones with the setting match duration, respawn delay and score limit. So let's drag in all 3 of those, the setting ones, and then we're simply going to clear the options. So clear options and plug that in right at the beginning, and make sure that we plug in all 3 of the boxes, so that way we're starting fresh. So compile and save, and we have that done. Now let's take a look at setting up keeping track of kills and deaths. So for that we're going to go into our framework folder, and we're going to start in our shooter player controller. So in here we're going to add 2 variables, the kills and the deaths. So add kills, and that's going to be an integer, and we want it to be replicated. So let me double check, yes. So we're going to set this variable to replicated, and then we can duplicate it, and we also want our deaths in here, and that's also an integer, and that's also going to be replicated. So those 2 are in place, and then we need to make sure that we go to our shooter GameState variable. And we also want to set this one to replicate. So over here we have this event on controller spawned, and this is run by the server instance of our player controller. So the server instance knows the player state, but we need to make sure that we set it to replicate. So now also the local player controller will know the correct player state variable. Okay, so we have this stuff set up, so we can close the player controller for now, and we're gonna go and take a look at our player state. So we want to change this up a little bit. Right now we are depending on the event copy properties, and that only works in a standalone game. So we're gonna make sure that we also have this working in our pie editor, so we can simply use it always. So for now we can get rid of this stuff, and we're simply going to go to our event begin play. And first thing we're going to do is check if we are the server instance. So let's grab a branch, and we're going to check is server. And if we are the server, we're going to get our player controller. So get player controller, and if we are under the player state, we can get the player controller that's created this player state. So we can cast this to our shooter player controller. So if this cast is successful, that means we are in a gameplay level, and otherwise we're using a menu controller, so we are in a menu. So this time we are using a shooter player controller, so we can promote it to a variable. So let's make sure that it's kind of named properly. I'm not going to bother with the spaces for now. So shooter player controller, and we need to make sure that the variable is replicated. So the other instances of my player state also have this variable set. Then we have a variable on our player controller that tells us if our profile is loaded. So we're going to get the boolean for that, is profile loaded. and we want to plug it into a branch. So we want to make sure that we actually have the profile loaded on the player controller before we try to access it. So if this is false, we're going to delay until next tick. And then plug it back into the branch. And if the profile is loaded, then we're simply going to get it from our player controller. So let's drag off the player controller again, and let's get the player profile. So the structure, and we can store it in the player profile structure on our player state. So connect it up to the true branch and plug this stuff in. So from the player profile we can get our player name, so we could drag off here and break our player profile and then simply set a player name variable. So we need to create that variable, and we're going to use that for the scoreboard later. So let's drag off the player name and promote to variable. So that's going to be my player name. And we actually want the variable to replicate. And let's plug it in over here as well. So we have that variable set up, and now we also want to make sure that we add the kills and the deaths in here. So let's add a new variable, call it kills, and that's going to be an integer. Make sure that it's replicated, and we can duplicate it and make that our deaths variable. So that's also a replicated integer. Okay, so we can compile and save, and we have the player state set up for now as well. So now we can take a look at the game state. So let's open up our shooter game state. And inside here I want to create a few variables that we can retrieve to show some information on our scoreboard. So we're going to create a new variable, and the first one is going to be our current game mode. The current game mode. So that's going to be our game mode's enumeration. And for the variables, in this case, we want them to replicate. So let's make sure that we select our current game mode and we set the replication to replicate it. And we also want to grab our match duration. So match duration, and that's an integer. And we also want it to replicate. And the last variable is going to be the score limit. Again, that's an integer, and again we want the variable to replicate. Okay, so with that stuff in place, we can take a look at setting up the shooter game mode. So let's dive into our shooter game mode. And inside here we want to create a function for when a player is killed. So let's start with that. We're going to create a new function, call it GameMode PvP. So we can use it for team deathmatch later if we want. And I'm going to call this killed player. So we're going to give the function two inputs, and those are both shooter player controllers. So the first one is going to be the killer and the second one is going to be the victim. So let's add those inputs, shooter player controller, and then we need a second one, and that's the actual victim, and that's also a shooter player controller. So first of all, let's grab the victim, and for the victim we're gonna grab the deaths, so get deaths, and we can simply increment the integer and plug it in. And then we also want to grab our shooter player state, so we can drag off the shooter player controller and get our shooter player state. And on the shooter player state we also have a death variable, so we can set our deaths over here as well. Plug it in and then plug in the result of the increment int node. So we have the deaths for the victim updated, and now we're going to grab the killer and we're going to do the same thing for the kills. So let's get the kills on the player controller, and we can increment that integer as well. Plug it in, and from the killer we can also get the player state. So get the shooter player state. No. And on the player state we also want to increment our kills integer, so we can simply set kills and then plug in the result from the increment node, and plug in the execution. So we can call this function to update the kills and the deaths. Let's compile and save it. And now I also want to create a function to update our game state. So let's create a new function and call that update game state info. No, I missed a letter in here. There we go. So what we want to do in here is grab our shooter game state from the variables, and we can simply set the variables that we created. So first we're going to set the current game mode, plug it in, and we can grab the game mode from our variables and simply plug it in. And then we also want to set the match duration and also set our score limit on the game state. So let's drag off twice and set both of them. So set score limit. And we can grab both of those from our variables as well. So we have the match duration stored. And we have our score limit stored. So by calling this function, we can make sure that the game state is up to date. So if we go to the event graph, then we're going to go to our event handle starting new player, and over here right before the is solo game, then we can add the call to our new function. So let's grab our update game state info and we can plug it right in between here. So that way the game state is always up to date. So let's compile and save this one. And now we need to take a look at our base character to make some changes to the damage events in there. So let's open up our hero base. And right now we have our event player take damage. So let's take a look for that event first. So that's over here. And this is actually mostly to take care of AI damage. So when we get hit by one of our AI, that's what this event is made for. So we're going to make a separate event for taking PvP damage. So what we're going to do first is grab all of this stuff and right click, and we're going to collapse it to a function. And let's call this function take IA damage. Take AI damage, sorry, what? Take AI damage, there we go. So this should have 3 inputs if everything has gone correctly, and it does. So we can make sure that we rename them again. So we have the hit result. And then we have the damage amount. And we have the attacker. So that's our take AI damage event, and we don't need to do anything in here, but we can use it to create our take PvP damage event. So we can simply grab the AI damage and we're going to duplicate it, and this is going to be our take PvP damage event or function. And inside of this function we want to make a small change. So what we're going to do for now is go all the way to the end of the function, and over here we have our game mode endless wave player died event that we're calling. So we can get rid of that and the cast to the shooter game mode. So since we're going to make a few more calls to our shooter game mode, we're going to change it up a little bit. So first of all, we can grab the cast over here, to be honest. So we're going to get our game mode and cast it to our shooter game mode. Then we want to promote this to a variable, because I'm pretty sure we do not have the game mode stored yet. So we have a shooter player controller and the HUD. So we're going to store the game mode in a variable. So that's our BP shooter game mode. And then first we're going to grab ourselves a validated get. So let's drag in a getter for the game mode, right click, convert to validated get, and we're going to plug it in right at the end over here. So that's the top branch after we are dead. So that's when is alive is set to false, the lower branch we are still alive, the top branch we are dead. So over here, if the game mode is not valid, we're going to get it and we're going to cast it and store it inside of our variable. And if it's actually valid, then we can call our PvP killed player event. So what we do need to do is get our attacker and cast it to a hero base. So over here we have the attacker variable, and that's an actor. So we need to make sure that we have that turned into a hero base variable. And I'm not sure if everything just froze or that my mouse button just died. My batteries may be dead. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, I'm back. I think we're good to go. So where was I? We wanted to get our attacker from the inputs. So get attacker, and the attacker is just an actor. So we need to cast it to our hero base. And with the hero base, we can get the shooter controller from the hero base. So first let's make sure that we plug it in over here and also to our validated get. And then from our hero base character, we can get our shooter player controller. And then we can also grab our shooter game mode variable that we just populated. And we're gonna call our PvP killed player event. So game mode PvP killed player. Then we're gonna plug in the attacker player controller into the killer one. Yes, obviously. And the victim is going to be our own shooter player controller, so we can simply grab it from the variables over here and plug it in. So we are the victim and the attacker is the killer. So we have the PvP damage set up for now. We're going to get back to this later. First let's go to the event graph, and then we can make a change over here. So we can disconnect it and simply grab ourselves a branch, and then we're going to check our is PvP damage boolean. So if it's false, then we want to call our take AI damage, and if it's true, we're going to call our take PvP damage. So let's plug in that event over here and make sure we plug in the variables again. So we have the hit result, the amount, and the attacker, and that should be good to go as well. Okay, so with all this stuff in place, we can start setting up the widgets for the scoreboard. So first of all, let's create a row widget that we can add to our scoreboard. So let's go to the widgets folder, create a user interface widget blueprint, and that's a user widget. So that's going to be widget blueprint scoreboard row. And let's create this one first. So I'm gonna grab a border and drop it on top of the empty panel here, so no canvas panel. For the brush color, I'm gonna drop down my alpha a little bit, and then on top of the border, I'm gonna grab a horizontal box. And then inside the horizontal box, I'm gonna grab myself a text variable. So the first one is going to be the text for the player name. So let's name the text, text player name. And we're going to turn it into a variable. So for this text, I want to set it to fill. And then I'm going to align it to the left and to the top. And then we can make sure that we have our font in place. So that's going to be this one. And then I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. So there we go. Then I'm going to duplicate this text. And the second one is going to be the text for the kills. So let's change the name, text kills. I'm going to set this to auto and then align to the right. And then also vertical alignment top. And I'm going to set a minimal desired width. So that's a little bit down here. Minimal desired width 150. And then for the justification, I'm going to set it to center. And with that one in place, we can duplicate it. And the last one is going to be the text for the kills, deaths, I'm sorry. So text deaths. And that's also desired width 150, center justification. So this should all be good. So we can use this as our scoreboard row. We could grab our horizontal box and make sure that it's set vertical alignment to top. And maybe for the border, it already is. So that's the content. So this is good. So we can compile and save it and then set up the graph. So let's dive into the graph. We're gonna need 3 variables, so let's create those first. The first one is the player name, so that's our text variable, and we want to set it to instance editable and exposed on spawn. And then we could duplicate this one, and that's going to be the kills. So we want the kills to be an integer, and again instance editable and exposed on spawn. And for the last one, the deaths, so if we duplicate it, an integer, instance editable, exposed on spawn. Then we want to set up event construct, so let's get rid of the other stuff. Oh freaking really, I need to grab another mouse battery again. Okay, I'm back. So event construct, first of all we're gonna set our player name, so let's grab the text player name, and we're simply gonna set the text, plug it in over here, and we can grab our player name variable. And then we also want to set the kills and the deaths, so we could duplicate this twice and make sure that we plug in the correct text references. So we have text kills and our text deaths, and then we can plug in our kills and deaths variables, so they will change it to an integer, and the default settings should be fine. So simply plug them in and we should be good to go. So we have the scoreboard row set up. Now we want to take a look at setting up the actual scoreboard. So before we dive into the actual scoreboard, there's one thing left in the scoreboard row. So if we go back to the designer, I want to grab the top one here, so the actual widget scoreboard row, and set the padding over here to 2. So that will give a little bit of spacing in between the rows and it looks a little bit better. So let's compile and save it, and now we can create our actual scoreboard. So let's create a new widget. Widget blueprint user widget, and this is going to be the widget blueprint scoreboard. And let's open it up. So we do need a canvas panel in here, so let's grab that one first and let's drag it on top of the scoreboard. Then the first thing I'm going to add is some text for the game mode. So I want to display the game mode name, so if we play free for all or team deathmatch, we could change the text in here. So let's set that one up first. This is going to be the text game mode, so let's change that, and we want the text to be a variable, so let me change the text over here. That's going to be game mode, that's fine. Then for the font, let's make sure we set it up correctly, so we have the correct font, and I'm going to increase the size a little bit. For the anchors, I'm going to anchor it to the center of the screen. And then I'm gonna grab the position 0 minus 360. And then for the size 300 by 55. And then we have alignment 0.5. So it's actually over here. So size should be 55. And then for the justification of the text, I'm gonna make it center. So the text is centered. So we have the game mode text in place. Now we're gonna grab ourselves a border for the actual scoreboard. So let's drag in a border. Oh freaking really. Okay, it's a good thing I stocked up on batteries lately, because I'm going through them like crazy. But let's go back to the widget. So we're gonna grab a border and drag it on top of here. So for the border, first of all, let's set up the anchors. So I'm going to anchor it to the center of the screen. And then for the size and the position, so position is going to be 0.75. And then I'm going to size it 800 by 400. And for the alignment, I'm going to use 0.5 and then 0.6 for the second one. So we could make the border black like the rest of my borders, so they match up a little bit. 0.7 alpha, so that should be good to go. Inside of the border, let's grab a vertical box. No, inside the border, thank you. And inside of that vertical box, I'm gonna drag another border. So let's grab a second border, drop it on top of the vertical box. And for this border, first of all, let's set up the color. So I'm gonna lower the opacity again, 0.5. And then inside of this border, I'm gonna drag a horizontal box. And inside of that horizontal box, I'm going to drag some text. So the first one is going to be the name of the player. So this is simply going to be the header of the scoreboard. So we could change the font and shrink it down a little bit. So maybe 18. And then for the text, I'm going to say name. And then that should be good to go. So we can duplicate this text and we're going to say kills for this one. And for this one, we're going to set it to align to the right. And we want to set it to fill. And then we're going to duplicate this one. And that's going to be our deaths. And this is also aligned to the right. So we're getting this annoying alignment stuff. So if we set this to auto, let me double check. So on my example project, I have this one set to fill to the left, and then we have auto right and auto right. So for the player name, we want to set it to fill and then to the left, and then for the kills, we want to set it to auto and then right. And that should also be the case for the deaths, and that's working. So then we want to go to the minimal desired width for the kills and the deaths, and we're going to set them to 150 and set the justification to center for both of them. So minimal desired width 150, justification center. So that's the header of the scoreboard, and then we're going to drop a vertical box on top of our previous vertical box. So let's drag in a second vertical box over here, and we're going to drop it on top of this vertical box. So this second vertical box is going to be the actual scoreboard. So let's name this vertbox scoreboard and turn it into a variable. And then for the alignment, we're going to set it to fill, so it fills up the rest of the space. And then below the scoreboard, I'm going to grab myself another horizontal box. So let's grab a horizontal box and drop it inside of the first vertical box again. So it's below the scoreboard vert box. And then in that horizontal box, I'm going to grab some text. So the first one is going to be the match duration. So let's change the name, text match duration. And turn it into a variable. So let's set up the font and stuff like that. So that's going to be this font, shrink it down. It still looks a little bit big to me, so let's make it 16. And then this is going to be the time limit. And then we can grab this text, duplicate it, and this is going to be the text score limit. And for this one, I want to align it to the right side. So we want to set it to fill and then align to the right. And then this is going to be the score limit. So that should be good to go as well. So there's a spelling error in here, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to change the text in the graph anyway. So we have our scoreboard widget set up. Let's compile and save it, and let's dive into our graph. So the first thing we're going to do is create a function to update the scoreboard. So let's create a new function in here and call that update scoreboard. So first of all, we're going to grab our vertical box for the scoreboard and we're going to clear all of the children. So it's empty again and we can start fresh. So we need our player controller for this, so we might want to go back to the event graph for just a little bit, and for event construct we're going to get our owning player and we can cast it to our shooter player controller. So plug this one into our event construct and we're going to promote the player controller to a variable. So we have our player controller stored and accessible. And then let's go back into the update scoreboard. So we're going to grab our player controller, and from the player controller we can get our shooter player state. so the player state. And on the player state, we actually have an array with all the player states of the other players. So if we drag off here, and we can get the player array. Let me see. Oh, I'm messing this up. I'm sorry. So we do not want the player state, we want the game state. So if we go from the shooter player controller, we can get our shooter game state. And on the game state is an array of player states for each player that is in the game. So we want to get our player array. So those are all player states in an array. So we can grab a for each loop, plug in the player states. Oh really? There we go. So we do need to cast these. So let's drag off the array element and we're going to cast them to our shooter player state. Plug it into the loop body. And then from the player state we can get our player name, our kills and our deaths. So we're going to do that first. So let's get my player name and then get kills and also get deaths. So with this stuff in place, we're going to grab our scoreboard row widget. So let's create that first, create a widget. And we can select our scoreboard row widget that we just created. So for the owning player, that's simply going to be our shooter player controller. We can grab it from the variables, plug it in. And we have the player name and the kills from the player state over here. Now, before we're going to do anything with this, we're going to create all of them and we're going to make sure that we sort them in the right order. So we're not going to add them to the vertical box yet. We're simply going to store them in an array. So we're going to need a local variable and that's going to be an array with all of the scoreboard rows. So let's create a new local variable and call that local scoreboard row array. So scoreboard row array. And that's an array of scoreboard rows. So scoreboard, widget blueprint, scoreboard row, and let's turn it into an array. And we also want an array with all of the kill counts. So let's add a second local variable, and that's our local kill count array. That's an array of integers. And then the last value that we need is our local index with max value. So let's create another local variable, local index with max value. And that's a single integer. So that's the local variables that we need. So we can grab our local scoreboard row array. And for this one, we're going to set an array element. Plug it in over here. Then we can grab the item from the return value of the create widget node. We want to make sure that we enable size to fit, and we're going to grab the index from the for each loop. So that's the array index. So let's make sure that it looks a little bit cleaner. Then we're going to do the same thing for the kill count array. So again, we're going to drag in our kill count array and we're going to set an array element. Plug it in over here as well and make sure that we also grab the index from the for each loop. So that's the index and not the item. So this way the indexes for these two arrays will match up. Again, we're going to enable size to fit and we can get the kills from the player state variable. So grab that from here and plug it into the item. So when this for each loop is done, we have two arrays with all of the scoreboard rows and with all of the kill counts. So now all we need to do is make sure that we sort those arrays. So let's grab in a branch over here, plug it into the completed pin. And first of all, we're going to check if our local kill count array is not empty. So let's drag it in and let's do an is not empty. Plug this one into our branch over here. And then we're going to create ourselves a loop. So we can grab our local kill count array. And from here we can get the maximum of an integer array. So we can look for max of int array. And what this does, it will grab the index with the highest value. So the index of the maximum value, and it also gives the value itself, but we don't really need that right now. So we can grab our local index with maximum value and set that over here. So let's plug it into the true bin if the array is not empty, and then plug in the index of max value in here. So now that we know that, we can grab our vertical box for the scoreboard. So this is the player with the highest score, so we're going to add him first. So we're going to grab the vert box scoreboard and we're going to add a child. Plug it in over here, and then we can grab the actual scoreboard row from the array. So let's drag in the local array and we can get a copy over here, and we can use the index from our local index with maximum value. So plug it in, plug this in the content, and after that we want to remove this index from the array so we can look for the next one with a higher index. So let's make a little bit of room. So we can grab in our kill count array over here and we can remove an index. Plug it in over here. So we want to remove the index with the highest value, and we want to do the same thing for the scoreboard row array. So we're also going to drag in that one and remove the same index. So that way the arrays will match up again. So again, we want to remove the index with the highest value. And after that, we're going to loop back to the branch to check if there's any more scoreboard rows left in the array. So plug it in over here. And if the array is empty, we added all of them to our scoreboard. So then we are done, and we can simply grab a return node, and that should be good to go. So this will update the scoreboard with the latest scores and also sort it from high to low. So now we can go into our event graph and continue setting up our event construct. So we can get rid of the other events, we don't need them. So after we stored our player controller, we're going to grab our update scoreboard and plug it in over here. And then from our player controller, we want to get some variables as well. So we're going to drag off the player controller and get our shooter GameState. And on the GameState, we have the current game mode, the match duration, and the score limit. So we're going to get those. So get the current game mode. And then also get the match duration. And get the score limit. And we're going to make sure that we display them on our scoreboard as well. So first of all, let's grab our text game mode, and we can simply set the text for this one. So set text, plug it in over here, and then we need to convert the enumeration to a string. So let's drag off the current game mode and get a toString. So that's enum to string, and then we can convert the string into a text, and that's the game mode one. Then we're going to switch on the game mode. So depending on what game mode we're playing, we might want to do something different. So let's drag off the current game mode, and we're going to switch on the enumeration. Plug it in over here. So if it's our endless wave game mode, we do not have our match duration and score limit set. That doesn't really make sense. So we're going to drag in the text match duration and the text score limit, and we're simply going to set the visibility to hidden. So set visibility, endless wave, hidden, and make sure that we plug in both of them. And if we are playing our free-for-all game mode, then we want to set the actual text. So first of all, let's grab the text match duration over here, and we're going to set the text. So this is for the free-for-all game mode. And then we can grab our match duration over here from the GameState. And first of all, we can divide it through 60. So let's divide through 60 to get the amount of minutes. And then we can drag off the match duration again, and we're going to do modulo. So that's the percentage sign. So modulo integer, and again modulo 60. So that's the amount of seconds left. And then we want to format this into a nice looking text. So we're going to drag off here and do format text. And we could say something like a time limit. So let's get rid of the cursor so you can see what I'm doing. So time limit. And then I'm going to do the double dots and then open bracket A, close bracket, double dots again, open bracket B, close bracket. And for the minutes, we can simply plug them into the A pin. And for the B pin, I want to grab a toText for the integer node. So let's look for toText, integer. And if we expand this, I want to set the minimum integral digits to 2. So if we have 5 seconds left, it will say 05. So it looks a little bit better like a digital clock. So we have that done, plug it into the time limit, and that's good to go. And then all we need to do is set the score limit. So we can grab the set text node again, paste it over here. And this time we want to set the text score limit. And we can grab a format text node again. And simply set the score limit. So type score limit, double dots, and then open bracket A, close bracket, and we can grab the score limit from our GameState variable. So plug it in over here. And that should make our scoreboard look a little bit better. So let's compile and save. Event construct is done. Now let's take a look at setting up the player controller and some inputs to make everything work. So first of all, let's set up the player controller. So we have an event or function in place where we can toggle the scoreboard. So let's go to our shooter player controller and in here create a new function, and I'm going to call this UI toggle scoreboard. And I'm going to give it one input, and that's the new visibility. So that's going to be a boolean, new visibility. So first we're going to grab a branch and check if we want to hide or show it. So if we want to show our scoreboard, we need to create a widget. And we want to create our scoreboard widget. So the owning player is going to be a reference to ourselves. And then we want to promote this to a variable. And that's going to be our widget blueprint scoreboard. So with the variable in place, we can drag it in over here. And first of all, we want to know if it's valid or not. So let's grab an isValid, plug this one into the true pin. And then if it's not valid, we're going to create the widget. And if it's valid, all we need to do is add it to the viewport. So we can grab the variable over here and add to viewport and make sure that we plug in both of the branches again. So that's if we want to show the scoreboard, and if we want to hide the scoreboard, we're also going to double check if it's valid just to make sure. So plug it into the false pin, and if it's valid, then we can remove it from parent. So remove from parent, plug this one into the valid pin, and if it's not valid, we do not need to do anything. So let's grab a return node and then plug in the rest of the branches as well. So this is our UI toggle scoreboard function, so we can compile and save it. Now we want to create an input so we can actually show the scoreboard. So let's go to edit project settings and let's create a new input. On the left side, input, and we're going to add an action mapping. So I'm going to call this a toggle scoreboard. And I'm going to use the tab key. There we go. And then we can dive into our hero base character. So let's go inside hero base. And in the event graph, we can add an input event. So let's create the toggle scoreboard. So that's the action event that we just created. And then we need a reference to our player controller over here. So we can drag it in and then we can simply toggle the scoreboard. So let's UI toggle scoreboard, and if I press the button, I want to make it visible, and if I release the button, I'm gonna, oh, that's the wrong node, I'm gonna make it not visible again. So set it to false, plug in the player controller and plug this one into the released pin. So now we can toggle the scoreboard with our tab key, and this should pretty much work. So let's compile and save, and let's have a little look. We're gonna grab a 2-player game and let's launch it and see what happens. So multiplayer host game, and then grab the client over here. So let's make sure that we're playing free for all. Join the match. And then ready up, and let's have a little look. So if I press tab, I have the scoreboard in place, so I forgot to select another profile, but that should be good to go. And if I start killing someone, my score should update. So right now I have 1 kill and the other guy has 1 death. And if I do it the other way around, that should still work. So let me see, where is that guy? Over here. And now we should both have 1 kill and 1 death. So that's good to go, and we have our scoreboard in place. And as you can see, at the top it says free for all, and at the bottom it shows the current time limit setting and also the score limit. So we have all the information in place in here as well. Okay, so I think we have the scoreboard and our scoring in place. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.